Bienvenidos from sunny Florida. This is Senor Gamache from La Clase Divertida, the Spanish program. Today we're going to give a workshop on how you can implement Spanish, French, German, Italian, whatever language you choose from home. It's one of the most challenging programs or challenging subjects to teach at home because let's face it, you might not have been very good at high school Spanish or German or French, and you really certainly don't feel confident to teach it at home to your children. Well, we can help you out with that. The first thing I'd like you to do is make sure that you print off the PDF file that goes along with this talk because it has a lot of useful information, and I'm not going to go over every single point here in this video. I want to thank you, first of all, for taking a few minutes to watch it. I hope it'll be informative. I'd like you to take a look at that first slide. It's from Teddy Roosevelt, and it comes in 1907, which at this point is, 113 years ago, but you'll be seeing how pertinent it is to today. In the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else. For it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the person becoming in every facet an American and nothing but an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. Any man who says he's an American but something else also isn't an American at all. We have room but for one language here. He's talking about an official language, and that is the English language. For we intend to see that our crucible turns out people out as Americans, an American nationality, and not as dwellers in a polyglot boarding house. Polyglot meaning many languages. And we have room but for one soul of loyalty, and that is a loyalty to the American people. Now, we're not going to get political on this at all, but you can see that this is exactly what we're dealing with today in today's society. Things haven't changed. Languages have been different since the Tower of Babel. So we want to make sure that we know how to speak another language so that we can go about our day, go about our business, help our children to be the best that they can be. You can see on the slide that I have up there now some of the different languages that we have in our country and how they've progressed over the years. The 1990 census, 2000 census, 2010 census, and of course the new one is not out yet. But as you can see, English-only speakers went from 198 million to 230 million. Total non-English speakers in that 20-year period went from 31.8 to 60.5, which means it doubled. Spanish or Spanish Creole went from 17 million to 37 million, more than doubling. And you can see the other languages that have become more and more prevalent. Look at Chinese. Chinese went from 1.2 million all the way up to 2.8 million. So some of these have become greater, some of them have become less, and that's the trend that our country is going in. And you can see also the enrollment in other languages in high school and upper level, high school and college. When I was growing up, French was the language of choice, and it was the language of diplomacy and so forth. Now English has supplanted that. English is now the most spoken in far as business and diplomacy and things like that. However, in studying foreign language in school, most people now, or a lot of people now, or a majority of the people are taking Spanish, especially here in the United States, more than Italian and German and all that, because we know that there are so many Latinos here in our country, and we want to make sure that we're able to talk with them and make them feel welcome. If you knew that your child was going to need his whole life to develop a skill and to master that skill, it doesn't need to be language. It could be any skill that's going to take their whole life to master. Some things that you might want to instill in them so that they could be successful at that would be, one, they're going to have to stick with it. They're going to have to stay with it. They're going to have to persevere and so forth. They're going to have good instruction. There's a famous golfer named Bubba Watson, and he's never really taken any instruction, and he has the most peculiar, unorthodox swing of anyone. But he's won the Masters twice. Well, he's one in a billion. Not many people can do what he has done without instruction. Your child's going to need instruction. But I think more than anything, your child's going to need the ganas. They're going to need the desire, because you can have them take piano lessons and they can be pretty good at it. But if they don't develop the ganas, if they don't develop the desire to do it, then they're never going to master that, and they're never going to be great at it. They could be functional, but they're not going to master it and be all that they can be in it unless they develop that ganas, that desire. So that's kind of what we want to do as far as foreign language is concerned. We want to develop that desire to want to do it, because if they don't want to do it, then there's nothing, there's nothing that's going to give them that impetus to want to do that. What are some reasons why we may want to study a foreign language? Well, first of all, job is probably the most important as far as when your children are studying languages in school. If you have two students and they're both equally qualified, the student that can speak another language fluently is going to get that job every single time. And especially now with so much in the service industry and so much in the medical industry and so many jobs going into the healthcare industry, people that know a foreign language, another language, and by the way, most people now are calling them world languages. They don't call them foreign languages. They don't like the stigma of foreign. Well, I don't buy into all that, but that's what they call them, world languages. If your child can speak another language, and certainly here in the United States, Spanish, they're not only going to get the job quicker, they're going to make more money, because many companies, especially in the medical industry, if your child can speak fluent Spanish, they're going to have a lot better chance of getting that job. Getting into college, every college, university, four-year university, requires 2 years of a foreign language in order to get into the university. But everybody has 2 years of language when they go into the university. The ones that colleges really look for, and the admission officers, they look for students with a lot of foreign language, because students who take a lot of foreign language are the better students. It's just the way it is. And as far as getting into the school, SAT scores, it is proven, and I don't know the synapses in the brain and all the functions of the brain and how that works, but students that have taken 4 years of a foreign language do better on SAT scores than any other four-year study. Math, science, English, history, all of them. Students have taken 4 years of a foreign language perform better on SAT scores than anyone else. I think that's pretty cool. Vacation. My wife and I were blessed years ago when I was teaching in the school system. So I taught in a school where the folks were pretty well off. It was a great school. And for every 6 students that Robin and I could get to go on these trips, one of us could go for free. So we would sign up 12 students or so, and then we would get to go to the trip for free. And when we went to Europe, invariably, the kids who studied French, France was their favorite country. And the students who studied Italian, Italy was their favorite country. And obviously the people that studied Spanish, Spanish was their favorite country. Why? Because you could function. It wasn't that you're just walking around and you don't understand anything. Now, while they were in high school students, obviously many of them were not fluent in the language, but just having some working knowledge with the language was a big, big plus, and knowing the culture as well. That was a huge one. Music. If your child is a ballet student or they're in opera and so forth, those kind of things are obviously enhanced when they have a lot of foreign language. I had a student years ago that was in my online high school Spanish class, because we teach Spanish live online for Spanish 1, 2, and 3 for homeschool families all over the country. Well, this young lady was an opera student. And about early on in her Spanish 2 year, she just raised her hand one day in class and said, "Senor, my opera teacher said to say thank you." And I said, "Your opera teacher? What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, since I've developed a real nice accent in Spanish, my Italian is beautiful." And I thought that was pretty cool, because obviously Italian and Spanish are very, very similar. Mission work. There was a famous missionary by the name of Cameron Townsend. If you haven't had your kids read one of the YWAM books on him, he's an amazing missionary, and he had a strong church down in Southern California. And from that vantage point, he used to travel down to Mexico and Guatemala, and he would go up into the mountains where the people didn't even speak Spanish; they spoke their own Indian dialects, and he would evangelize obviously with translators and other people, and they kept talking to people, and the people loved to hear about Jesus, and they understood all the things that he stood for, and what it meant to become a Christian. And he was having a hard time getting people to actually just go over the edge and become, accept Christ. And finally he got really discouraged, and he said to his translator, "What is it? Why you understand this? You say you believe the miracles, all the above. Why don't you want to commit and give your life to Christ?" And this man that probably never went to school one day in his life came up with a profound statement that has literally changed the world. He said, "If your God is so powerful, why can't he speak my language?" Well, that hit Cameron Townsend like a ton of bricks. From that point forward, that became his mission. And he's the man that started Wycliffe Bible Translators, who obviously have changed the world because they've put the gospel in hundreds of different languages throughout the world. In fact, a lot of times they had to even create a written language so that they could then put the gospel in that written language. So when you go on mission trips, obviously if you can speak the language, it's going to be a big plus, because people are going to listen to you more if you have taken the time to do that. So we want to make sure that those are some of the things that you understand why you may want to study a foreign language. On top of that, it should be fun. Spanish, German, French, Italian, all those are really, really fun things to learn. So we want to make sure that we are having a good time while we're studying these languages. How do we learn language? Well, first of all, God designed us for language. It's what we do best. What do little kids learn first? They learn how to walk, and they learn how to talk. And that's what we do best as human beings is communicate. Well, not so much communicate, but at least talk a lot of times. But talking is the most natural thing in the world. Well, how do we learn that language? Well, God takes our brains and he put into it every single thing we hear goes into our short-term memory. Every single thing, whether it's the fire alarm or the kids talking or the dog barking or the doorbell ringing. It brings to mind whenever the Beverly Hillbillies back in the day, whenever the day someone would ring their doorbell, they were amazed by that, and they went looking for what was making that noise. And they couldn't believe that every time that music went off, someone happened to be at the door, and it took them a while to tie that in. I thought that was pretty funny, but it goes to show you that after we hear something, it doesn't go into our long-term memory until it's repeated over and over and over. And lots of times there's mistakes in that. And if you remember back when your children were little, they made funny interpretations or sounds, meaning words that they couldn't quite pronounce yet. I remember my grandson used to like to watch, well, still does like to watch, he's 5, and he likes to watch PJ Masks. Well, there was this little kid on there named Romeo, and he was an evil kid, but he did kind of things that weren't real nice. And one of the things he did was he stole a train. He made it disappear one time. He made a train disappear. Well, my grandson always called him Roimo. Instead of Romeo, it was Roimo. Roimo, Roimo, Roimo. Well, we were riding a bike one day, and we rode over the tracks, and I said, well, gotta look. No train coming. And he said, Pop, I guess Romeo must have made it disappear. And he looked up at me and said, Pop, Romeo. I said, Romeo, 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 Romeo. And he kept saying it over and over because then he could say it. Well, that's the way it is with another language when you're studying it. I always stress to the kids that they're going to make a million mistakes, and we really need to laugh about them and have fun with it as opposed to just being bothered by it. As adults, we get kind of self-conscious about how we sound, so we are a little more apt to not open our mouth. Kids, they could care less. And with our program, La Clase Divertida, the elementary program, our design is for the families to do it together. That's why we put it on television, and the families do it together. And when you're with each other, learning the language, and you mess up, and this mom laughs, and the kids laugh at mom, and the kids laugh at dad, and dad laughs at the kids, and all that, it makes it so kids don't even care about making mistakes because it's fun. And that's one of the things that I really want to stress to you guys. Um, if it's going to get into long-term memory, it needs to be repeated over and over and over and over and over again. The problem is that if it's not relevant and if it's not interesting, then their brain starts to turn it off, and then they don't remember the things, and it doesn't go into their long-term memory. Um, there are some programs that say no rote memorization of words. And it's a very big program. It was very popular for many years in the homeschool arena. And I used to say, well, if we don't memorize the words, where are they going to come from? Of course we have to memorize them. Now, you're not going to memorize a whole language right off the bat, but remember what I said at the beginning? It's going to take your whole life to master a foreign language. It isn't something you do in a year, 2 years, 3 years. That's why if you ever hear people, two things I really want you to think about. If you ever hear anyone talk about fluency is a lifetime endeavor. Okay? Now, you can be functional long before you're fluent. Also, if you hear someone say that it's immersion, please walk the other way, because there is no program that you're going to have that's immersion. Now, they may be all in the language, but that doesn't mean it's immersion, because when you drop someone for 20 minutes a day or half hour a day or half hour every other day or every third day, and you're in that language for that few little bit of time, you're not going to be immersed in the language. Immersion means you have a French cook or a French maid or a Spanish maid or someone who's working in your home all the time, and you are around it all the time, and that maid or whatever is talking to your children all the time in the language. That's immersion. You can't do immersion in your home with a little program. What it does is it causes confusion and it causes frustration because the kids aren't understanding. They're understanding very little of it. If I was in your home and I was with your family all the time and I could pick up objects all the time and hold them up and over over and over again, like I said, to get into that long-term memory, then that would be different. Then you could call that immersion. We really want to watch out for those two terms, and if they use them, then please try to walk the other way from a program that says it's one, immersion, and two, that it's going to create fluency quickly. It just does not happen. It's a lifelong process. I learn new English words all the time, and so do you. It takes a long time to become fluent. So that's the way languages work. Another thing that we talk about is, what language should you study? What language should I study? There's a lot of different thoughts that go into this. One, does someone in your family speak the language? Whatever the language is that you want to learn. Or do they speak fluently another language? Is your family's language another language? If your family's language is Tagalog, then that's what you ought to learn first. You can learn other languages after that, but learn the language of your family first. I had a lady one time that came up and said, Senor, I really want my kids to learn Spanish. But my father-in-law is now living with us. He's elderly, and he was a Greek professor. Should we learn Spanish or Greek? I said, if you have a grandfather in the home that speaks fluent Greek and was a professor, let the grandfather teach the kids Greek, because, one, they'll learn the language, and two, they'll develop a bond with grandpa that they would never have before. So that has a lot to do with it. A lot of homeschool families, they want to study Greek or they want to study Latin, and I never dissuade people from that. That I'm a Spanish teacher. We homeschool because we want to teach what we want to teach when we want to teach it. And to me, if your family wants to study uh, Latin, that's great. I want you to think about a couple things, though, with that. Latin helps Spanish, Latin helps French, Latin helps Italian, Latin helps Portuguese. But Portuguese helps Latin, Spanish helps Latin, French helps Latin, any of the Romance languages help. So it's reciprocal. Whichever one you're learning is helped by Latin, and Latin is helped by that. My thought is that the very first thing you need to teach, you need to say to a young child is, we're going to learn this language. Okay, mommy, that sounds like fun. Who speaks this language? Well, no one speaks this language. Why are we learning a language that nobody speaks? That's number one. Number two, you could say, well, it's going to help you when you get into high school and college. Well, to a little kid, high school and college is 50 million miles away. They're not thinking of high school or college. They're thinking about getting done with school so they can go out in the backyard and play. So those are two tough sells, and I'm not saying you shouldn't. But again, my thought process is, why not learn at a young age a language they can use at the Mexican restaurant or at the grocery store or whatever it might happen to be, and then as they get closer to high school and college, then have them study some Latin, because they're going to help each other one way or the other. Other thing might be your mission interest. I've had moms that said their 10-year-old son was sure that God was calling him to be a missionary to China. Well, then if God gives you the ganas, and remember we spoke of the word ganas, desire, if God gives you that desire, then that's the best desire that there is. And so you want to try to work on that as well. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. Next slide talks about, oh yes, this is a real important one. Before we start any language study, you have to think about a couple things. One, you want to develop a deep understanding and appreciation for not only the language, but the culture. The culture is the language, is the people, is the language, is the culture, is the language, is the people, is the culture. You can't separate them. So if there's a lot of things within a particular people group that you are going to have to explain away and that you're not agreeing with and you find abhorrent or whatever it might happen to be, you might want to think about doing another language, because again, that is going to be the people and the culture and the people are all one with the language. Okay. We also want to think about that you're going to have have exposure to the people in that language. If not one-on-one, then if you have some way to expose yourself to that. Obviously, the best way is to travel to that country, and someday you may be able to do that. But nowadays, you can find a lot of different ways that you can get exposure in the language, and we're going to talk about a few of those in a little bit. One of the questions I get a lot of times is, when do I start? Actually, I just got an email from a family who had lost it was a VHS tape that they had, and they didn't have VHS anymore, so the lady wanted to buy our program on the DVD. I thought it was really cute because the lady said that her children had taken our 1, 2, and 3 elementary program, and now one of them is fluent in the language, and the other one is studying the language in college and wants to minor in it in school. And I just thought that it was really neat, and she said that how it had developed a nice relationship between the family and each other because they could do this together. Well, when the one daughter was very, very young, the mom wanted to come see my workshop again because they had bought the program and they wanted to make sure they knew how to implement it best. And so they came into my workshop. Well, as the Lord put it together, which was really cool, when they walked in the room, I had already started my talk, and in my workshops, I always have a great big A, E, I, O, U in different colors on the screen as I start up my workshop, because we tie the colors with the sounds and make a little jingle of it. And so the lady walked in, the little girl, and as she was walking in, she saw the big letters on the screen, and at the top of her lungs, she started, Maria, bed, and they weren't She wasn't saying it very well, but she was doing it at the top of her lungs. And someone had just asked me the question, "When do I start?" And I said, "There you go. That's when you start." Obviously, starting earlier is better. Um, because phonologically your children are going to develop better pronunciation if they start early, because we can all make all the sounds, unless obviously if you have a speech problem. When I was a little kid, I had a lisp, and so the first time I heard a person from España talking, when they say the letter C or the letter Z, they make it a sound. So instead of the letter Z being zeta, it's zeta. Instead of saying gracias, they say gracias. Well, I thought the person had a speech, a lisping problem, but they didn't. It's just part of the language. But we want to make sure that when we're doing these kind of things, that the pronunciation is good, and little kids can pronounce things well. If I was here in front of you and we were in a group speaking, and I told an adult to say gracias, probably unless they've had a bunch of Spanish, they would say gracias. Because in our brain, we see gracis and gr, since Tony the Tiger is great, right? So gracias becomes gracias instead of what I said would be gracias. Well, your child is just going to say gracias. And so it's going to be a lot easier for them to pronounce words correctly. And that's the neat thing about it. When they're little children, pronunciation is very easy, and phonologically it's easier for them. However, I say that with a little bit of a caveat, because how the language is taught is every bit as important as when you start it. If you start a young kid out using an adult program, that is going to be almost worse than not starting them at all, because they're going to be bored, they're going to be frustrated, and they're not going to learn things that little kids want to learn. I want them to learn about their life, their brothers, their sisters, their selves, their dog, their cat, their favorite color, things like that that are important to them. They don't care about Pierre over in Paris. They don't even know Pierre. I don't even know Pierre. Okay, so we want them to learn about themselves. I want them to learn about you and your family and how they react to things, and that's really important, because we want to start it out that way. Please, age appropriateness of your program is of the utmost importance. It is absolutely of the utmost importance. So please, you start them early best. You can learn the language. You're never going to have a great accent, probably, if you're just now starting out in the language. You're never going to have a perfect accent. If you moved to Germany today, you would never lose your American accent on top of your German. Just wouldn't happen. I'm not saying never. Not many people would. When your children go to Germany, they're never going to have an American accent on top of their German, because as you're younger, you develop that phonological ability much easier. It's already innate in you. As you get older, the ability to learn new sounds and so forth, if your brain and your tongue and your palate have not used them before, for example, the R. I can't tell you how many people have told me, "Senor, I can't speak Spanish." I say, "Why?" "Because I can't do that thing with my tongue." Well, the R, it's one sound in the language. It doesn't mean you can't speak the language. It just means you can't make that one sound. And phonologically, you're not going to be able to make all the sounds if you're an adult when you start, but kids can. So that doesn't mean that every kid that starts out is going to be able to do the R, but if they're around it, they're going to develop the ability to say R. I've never heard of a Spanish person that couldn't say R, so it's something that they develop at an early age. So age appropriateness obviously is of the utmost importance. Please, if you took anything away from this, run away from when they say that it's going to be immersion, and please, age appropriateness of the language. What am I going to look for in a foreign language program? Well, before we start, you need to know that the reason that they fail is lack of desire. Now, it could be mom's lack of desire to teach it. It could be the kid's lack of desire because it's nothing exciting or fun. As well, eventually, the lack of exposure. Eventually, if you want your children to be fluent and really proficient in the language, at some point, they're going to need to be immersed in that language. And we have to also know about the learning styles of the children. Some kids are kinesthetic. They really like the hands-on. Some kids are audio. They really like the auditory part of it. They pick that up easily. I was always that way. I never had to see the words. I could just hear it and repeat it, and I knew what it was, and so forth. Adults, a lot of times when they're learning another language, they're visual and they want to be able to see the words. Okay, well, that's why on our program in La Clase Divertida, we put the words on the screen all the time until the kids really develop the ability to memorize the stuff, because the kids sometimes want to see it, but little kids could care less about it. But the adults, remember I said I wanted mom and dad to learn it with them? Well, the adults, we want them to have the ability to see the words, because adults like to see the words as well as hear them. So that's kind of the way we work at it. Most people, however, they're a little combination of all of them. I think everybody likes hands-on. My dad, when I was growing up, used to always have me go out with him when he was fixing cars. And there was when you could fix a car before all the computer parts of it and all. But he used to always have me go out and watch him do it. And then when I was old enough, he'd have me physically do the things, even though, and I'm so pleased he did it, even though a lot of times it took him twice as long to do it. It developed in me the ability to do it and the ability to learn how to do it and want to do it. So that was pretty good. I want to go through now some things that you really want to know about when you're going to choose a program. First of all, it has to keep the attention of the children. Remember, it has to be repeated over and over and over and over and over again. So if it doesn't keep their attention, then they're never going to get that over and over and over and over and over and over again. Also, it needs to be non-cumbersome for you, because if we try to cover that up and we try to show that we want the kids to learn, but if it's something that's going to be burdensome for you to do and you're going to have to prepare for it every time, you have enough to prepare for with math and science and the things that the kids have to have. Much less, you don't want to spend a lot of time preparing for an elective such as a foreign language. So it needs to be non-cumbersome, because we try to show it, but in your mind, if you're not really up with doing the program, it's going to show. It's going to show. Teaches the sound system. I really think it's important. A lot of places, a lot of programs, they just jump in and they say, oh, I don't need to teach sound system. The kids will pick it up while they're getting it. I want something the kids can stand on. The very first thing I want them to know is I, A, E, O, U, so that every time they see those, they can know it and they can stand on it and they can have something that is grounded. The sound system of the alphabet, the sound system of the vowels, it's of the utmost importance. Conversing. It really needs to have conversation in it. If it doesn't have conversation in it, the kids are never going to learn how to speak. They're going to learn words, but I don't want them to know just words. I want them to be able to converse in the language. In my program, every lesson, the kids learn not only how to answer questions, but how to ask them. Answering questions is simple, because a lot of times you can do it with one word. What's your favorite color? Blue. How old are you? 7. Well, that's easy, and that's important, obviously. But most of your children don't look Latino. So if they went out to the park, no little Latino kid is going to think they speak Spanish, so they're never going to speak Spanish to them. Consequently, your kid's going to say, well, why do I need to speak Spanish? Nobody ever speaks Spanish to me. But if they know how to initiate the conversation and they know how to walk up to a kid and say, hola, ¿cómo te llamas? Or ¿cuántos años tienes? How old are you? What's your brother's name? Then they get a response back from the kid, and then that's where the magic starts, because they really want to be able to do that again sometime. So they come back, Mommy, his name is Joey, and he's 7, and I didn't understand anything else he said. Well, you undergot 2 things that they said, so that's a cool thing, and then they want to learn more and more and more and more and more. So that's kind of my goal. I want it to be conversational. Culture. Culture is the fun stuff. Culture is the thing that we want to do the most, because, well, not the most, but we want to incorporate that, because I said before, the culture is a people is a language, is a culture is people is a language. Taking out the cultural part is boring. The food and the art and the games and the songs and all that stuff not only helps develop fluency, but it gives the kids fun things to do. In our program, and you'll be able to see from this slide you're seeing now, we incorporate all that in there. Why? Because the kids want to do it. I want to hook them for life. I want them to love learning a different language. I want them to enjoy. I want them to look forward to it. And we put all this in the kit so mom and dad don't have to put it together. So it's all there. So that's one of the things that I really want to emphasize to you. And it needs to be relevant. Again, it needs to have to do with their family. It has to do with their friends, their favorite things, their favorite foods, so forth. I want them to learn about talking about themselves, because what do kids talk about most when they're little? Me, 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 me. My 2-year-old grandson, he's in the me stage, and he never says I. Me come to your house, Pop Pop? And so we want to talk about me and my and whatever might have to be. So it needs to be relevant. It needs to be relevant. We want to make sure that we do have access to it. It is so much easier nowadays to have access to another language than it was when I was growing up. I was blessed to live in Florida. There were a lot of Latinos around, so I could practice my Spanish a lot. But not all of you have that ability. But eventually, you're going to need to have exposure. I have serious doubts about trying to study a language that at some point you're going to have a lot of exposure to. But $64,000 question: how do I get that exposure? Today, again, it's so much easier with the internet. You can type in a couple words and you can get Peppa Pig in Spanish or Italian or whatever it might happen to be. You can get songs and kid songs in the language. You can watch game shows on TV, watch those a little bit of hoochie coochie going on a lot of times with them. But those kind of things, you can watch newscasts that the kids, as they get a little older, that they're watching on their own TV. They can watch the newscasts in other countries. You can turn on your TV and you can put it in a different language while they're watching their baseball game, whatever it might happen to be. There is so much more. There's other video series one is called Nest Video, N-E-S-T. They have a beautiful program that they do it in Spanish and English and even some other languages that I think they might have. And not only do they have it, but they have questions and answers in the target language and so forth. Go to the supermarket, look up online, what products do we get from Italy? Let me see. Okay, we get this, and well, let's go when we're at the supermarket. Let's see if we can find some of these items. And then you look at the things and say, well, what's the price of that one compared to that one? Oh, that one's from Italy, that one's from the U.S., and that one's a little more expensive. Why do you think that's a little more expensive? Well, this is the same product, but it doesn't come from Italy. And those kind of things develop conversation skills, but not only that, they develop a learning about marketing and how our country works and so forth. So it can be a multi-level situation. If you can travel, obviously that's a great way to get exposure. And foreign exchange students, the reason I fell in love with the language is when I was in high school, we were blessed to have a lot of foreign language students coming into our school. I had one young lady stay with our family from Chile. I had another young man that I developed a real good friendship with from Costa Rica. And it just was so cool that I could talk about things that nobody else could talk about with that person. So it was something that developed a friendship with that person, but also a love of the language. And there are many good foreign language programs, and even through Christian organizations. I know in our world today, we kind of leery of bringing someone in our home that might be that. They really screen these kids great, and I'm not saying you never get one that doesn't work out, but very rarely. Most of the time, it's they're screened, and the people that come generally have some money, so they aren't, you're not coming up with the money. You're not expected to come up with money to provide for them, except for food and so forth. But foreign exchange students is an awesome way to do it, and church, it's particularly Spanish. If you want to study Spanish, most churches, or a lot of churches, and I'm sure that some churches in your area, they have services in Spanish. And you can go to the service along with your own service, maybe go Wednesday evening or something to that church, and the people are going to love that you're there. But it allows your children to hear worship songs, hear the gospel in Spanish. One of the best ways is through the Word. Buy your child a Spanish and English Bible. They have them so they're side by side. I have one that's side by side. It makes it real. And it's very easy to understand, quote unquote, church talk because it's something that your children already know. They already know the word and what the Bible says in a lot of places, so that it's easy to understand it. Next, I want to go to just a kind of a review of what we've talked about. One, make sure it's relevant. Make sure that it's fun. Make sure that it's conversational. Walk away from immersion and fluency if those promises are given. Also, I want it to be something fun for them to do so that they can enjoy the language while they're learning it. And remember, moms and dads, it needs to be something you want to do. It needs to be something not difficult for you to implement. Those are all important. I want to run over very briefly, and I'm going to stick right to the slides on these, about briefly how you can implement high school Spanish in your home. My wife and I have established our program on elementary 20-some years ago, and I teach live Spanish 1, 2, 3 classes that are, obviously, I'm a certified teacher, and you can get the qualifications on that if you want to, and the kids get documentation that they have completed those. If you'd like to talk to me about that, we'd love to chat with you about that. But I'm going to go through a couple ways that you may be able to implement high school Spanish in your home, and it's only going to take a few minutes. The first one is computer-based CDs. This is something like Rosetta Stone or Berlitz, something like that. This is going to be easy for you to do because there's nothing for you to do. It isn't the most interesting in the world. Kids have to be kind of nose to the grindstone type thing. Some of the pros are that it is easy to use, but the cons are, where do they go for help? How do they know they're pronouncing the words correctly? They do have the software that kind of gives you an idea that you're pronouncing things correctly. But if they don't know what they're doing wrong, then it becomes very difficult and exasperating when they're not pronouncing things correctly. How do they learn to converse? Some of them have chat rooms that you can go to, but I don't know that I want my children chatting with somebody live online that I don't know. One of the main things is grammar. When they get to go to college, they're going to need to know the grammar. And they're going to need to know how to conjugate verbs and what the different tenses are, and not just hearing it and saying it, but knowing what the names of them are and so forth. A lot of times colleges are not accepting this type of work anymore. Co-op and tutoring. Co-ops can be great if you have a teacher that knows what they're doing. If it's Mrs. Rodriguez that is from Guatemala, she may or may not know how to teach the class. It is beneficial, and the kids get to practice conversationally and so forth. You can do cultural things. One of the things I found out when my daughter and my wife were attending different co-ops is sometimes everybody doesn't have the same attitude about why they're there and so forth. Need to make sure that that teacher is going to be there for 2 or 3 years. Next one is virtual school. Depending on what this is, this can be really horrible. If this is something where they're just watching someone teach, or they have assignments that they have to complete and it's not live, don't do this, please. The only way you would possibly do this is if your child had Spanish and you wanted to check off the boxes. It's very boring, it's a cheat fest, and it's something that the kids are not going to learn well on. Now, if it's live, then that's a different story. Dual enrollment, this can be a great thing. If you want your children to be on campus with college kids, it can be a great thing because they get the college and the high school credit. They go very fast, though. If they've never had the language before, you might want to make sure that they are be able to keep up, because what I cover in a year, they cover in a half a year. So it's very difficult in the fact that the teacher flies through it because they kind of assume that you've had some language before. Live online classes, not virtual. I'm real partial to this because this is what I do. It should be taught by a certified teacher. You can do it from home. You can do it from the Starbucks. You can do it from McDonald's. You can do it in the car if you have the Wi-Fi, etc. It needs to be live and interactive. And please, if you are going to take online classes, please see my other workshop that has to do with being successful in online classes. It provides oral practice. Some cons, and I do some of these tongue-in-cheek. It is rigorous. I expect the kids to be excellent, and if they're not organized and motivated, then they're going to struggle with it. So we want to make sure that they are not only academically ready for it, but maturity-wise, we want them to be ready for it. And this is kind of what mine looks like. My wife says it looks like Hollywood Squares. The kids can see me. I can see them if they have a camera. Everyone has to have a headset and mic. I hear every kid, every class. I teach off that whiteboard there, as well as a college textbook that we use. It's been very successful. The kids have done a great job. The other one is online tutoring or school. There are some that I think it's called the Homeschool Academy, where you go one-on-one with a teacher from Guatemala or somewhere. It can be kind of pricey. You choose the time that you want to be there and how often. You can take class from home just like you can in any other virtual class. They keep records for you. You want to make sure that you're spending enough time to make it a credit that you can get. How do they introduce culture? Is their accreditation accepted by not only your homeschool group or your county, but the university that your kids want to attend? And they don't have the camaraderie in the classroom. I think one of the neatest things about the program that I use is that kids can talk to each other all the way through. So they develop a camaraderie. A kid from California can develop a camaraderie with kids from New York and Florida and Texas and all that, and they can share experiences and how things are different or the same in the homeschool. And so that's a pretty cool thing. Now, these have been some ways that you can do high school at home. Please, if you have any questions, email me, call me. My phone number's on there. I'm going to give you my phone number now, and it'll be on the screen, 386-299-7633. Please call me if you have any questions. Please, I want to talk to you. I want to help you out, whether it's with my program or any kind of program, whatever language it might help be. I might try to help you out with that and implement the best you can. Remember, keep it fun. Gracias. Que Dios les bendiga. God bless y'all. Have a great day.